Sophia Carter had spent nearly a decade perfecting the craft of being invisible in the small mountain town of Pine Hollow, Wyoming, managing Carter's Market with the quiet precision of someone who preferred life to pass her by without leaving a ripple in its surface. The people in Pine Hollow knew her as the calm shopkeeper who always remembered their birthdays, stocked the freshest apples, and kept the shelves in perfect order. What they did not know was that the woman behind the counter had once been capable of ending a man's life in ways that could not be found in any self-defense manual. Pine Hollow sat in the shadow of snow-covered peaks, its main street lined with wooden storefronts that looked like they had not changed in 50 years. The town's heartbeat was slow and steady, population just over 4,000, elevation high enough that winters bit hard and summers came late. Life here moved at a pace where the most heated arguments happened during the monthly council meetings over whose turn it was to plow the North Road. Carter's Market stood right at the center of Main Street, between Miller's Hardware and the diner famous for its chicken pot pie. Sophia had purchased the struggling market 8 years earlier, paying in cash, without asking for financing, without showing any paper trail. The former owner was happy to walk away from years of losses and never thought to ask where Sophia came from. That suited her perfectly. She arrived with little more than 2 duffel bags, and an expression that told people not to pry. The story she gave was simple enough. She wanted a quiet life after working too many years in busy cities, and nobody in Pine Hollow was the type to dig deeper if you smiled and stocked their coffee beans on time. Every detail of the store reflected her personality. Clean, efficient, and built with an attention to space that went far beyond the needs of selling groceries. Every aisle had more than one exit. Mirrors gave her line of sight to every blind spot. The counter was set so she could see both the front and side doors while keeping solid cover. She had remodeled it herself, building strength into the structure, as if she expected trouble to come crashing through one day. The locals had their own theories. Martha from the diner believed Sophia had escaped a bad marriage. The delivery driver thought she was in witness protection. Sheriff John Turner once ran her name when she first applied for a license and found nothing more than an unusually clean record. Too clean, perhaps. But he kept those doubts to himself. It was a small town, and Sophia caused no trouble. What none of them could guess was the hidden room beneath the market. Behind stacks of bulk flour and cases of canned vegetables was a reinforced steel door. Inside was an arsenal maintained with almost obsessive care: tactical rifles, combat knives, body armor, communication devices that could reach halfway across the world. All checked daily. Each morning before opening the shop, Sophia descended into that basement and worked through a routine. She inspected every piece of equipment, tested every radio, ran physical drills until her body moved with the smooth power of a predator. Then she would climb the stairs, flip the lights on, and become once more the polite store owner who knew every customer by name. Her young assistant, Michael, 17 years old and saving for college, admired her endlessly. He once asked why she stayed in such a quiet place when she clearly could do anything she wanted. Sophia gave him the same answer she gave everyone: sometimes the best place to be is exactly where you are. She never told him that Pine Hollow was the first place she had slept through the night without her hand near a loaded weapon. On the morning of February 15th, the day began like countless others. The air was sharp with winter cold, and the forecast warned of a storm rolling in. By afternoon, Sophia arrived before sunrise, as always, unlocking the door, receiving deliveries, and brewing the first pot of coffee in the back room. She moved through the shop with a sense of order that would have made a drill instructor proud. By 7, the shelves were stocked, the registers humming in. The day ready to unfold, she stood behind the counter, sipping her coffee, scanning every aisle as a habit, not as paranoia. Michael arrived, stamping snow from his boots and muttering about the ice on his windshield. He asked if they might close early if the storm hit hard. Sophia gave a measured smile and told him they would see how the day went. Outside, the sky was already the color of lead, promising snow before noon. Customers began to drift in. Old Mr. Benson for his morning paper, Martha picking up ingredients for the diner's soup of the day, a young mother with her toddler collecting last-minute lunchbox items. All normal, all predictable. Sophia knew every face, every routine, and every possible place each person might take cover if something went wrong. It was the sort of quiet rhythm she had built her life around. The kind of rhythm that made people believe nothing dangerous could touch them here. Yet deep inside, Sophia Carter knew rhythms could be broken in an instant, and though she never said it aloud, she lived every day with the quiet certainty that one day they would be. The storm had started early, tiny flecks of snow drifting in the air. By mid-morning, the wind, carrying a low whistle down Main Street. Inside the market, the shelves were neat, the coffee smell warm, and comforting the regular flow of customers moving in and out like a tide. Sophia was behind the counter going over inventory numbers while keeping her eyes on the store without seeming to. She noticed Michael restocking the cereal aisle, a slight limp in his step from an old basketball injury. She always kept such details in mind because in her world you calculated how fast someone could move if trouble came. Mrs. Martha was near the produce section choosing apples with her careful arthritic hands. A middle-aged man browsed the dairy section. Another customer scanned the bakery case, all harmless scenes that could shift into chaos in a blink. At exactly 10:47, the front door bell chimed, and 4 men entered. The change in the air was immediate. Heavy coats that hung strangely on their frames, boots that moved with a practiced rhythm, not the shuffle of locals. Their eyes scanned quickly their positions, spreading just enough to cover key points in the store. Sophia's mind began running calculations, weapons under the coats concealed, but obvious to her trained eye. The leader's broad shoulders, tattoos visible above his collar, the aggressive confidence of someone used to forcing compliance. The leader stepped toward the counter while the others fanned out. One moved toward the back near the frozen foods, another drifted toward the rear exit, and the last stayed near Michael, blocking his way out. It was a clean entry for an amateur team, but Sophia had seen better and faster in places far worse than Pine Hollow. She slid her hand beneath the counter, pressing a recessed switch that sent a silent alarm to the sheriff's office, knowing they would not arrive in time, but was a necessary step. The leader's hand moved inside his coat and came out holding a sawed-off shotgun, the short barrel sweeping lazily in her direction. The smile on his face did not reach his eyes. The other 3 revealed pistols, one of them another shotgun, all aimed to control the scattered customers. Michael froze beside the cereal display, the color draining from his face. Martha dropped her bag of apples, which rolled across the floor. The middle-aged man in dairy lifted his hands slowly, every second the tension coiled tighter. The leader's voice was loud enough to echo off the ceiling tiles, ordering everyone to get down. Sophia kept her stance behind the counter, hands visible, her expression calm in a way that projected compliance without surrender. Years of training told her she still held an advantage if she chose her moment. While the man barked again for her to get down, swinging the shotgun toward her chest, she spoke evenly, moving one hand toward the register, drawing his focus just enough to shift his aim. In that fraction of distraction, her stance changed, weight settling on the balls of her feet, breath slow and measured, eyes mapping every possible move in the next 3 seconds. To the untrained, she looked like a shopkeeper trying to cooperate. To someone who had fought in close quarters, she looked like a predator about to strike. She called to Michael in a low, steady tone, telling him to do exactly as they said. The boy nodded stiffly, his eyes wet but locked on her voice. The man holding him as cover was too close, too unbalanced, his weapon arm at an awkward angle. Sophia filed the detail away for when she would need it most. The leader came closer, shotgun still raised, his mouth shaping another threat. When her right hand flashed to the side, she grabbed a can of beans from a display and sent it spinning in a precise arc. It struck him in the throat with a force that snapped his head back and crushed his windpipe, his shot discharging harmlessly into the ceiling. Shards of tile rained down as Sophia vaulted over the counter, closing the distance before the others could adjust. The second man tried to bring his pistol to bear, but she had already dropped low, rolling behind an end cap. She came up with a 10-pound bag of flour, slamming it into his gun hand. With a burst of white dust blinding him, the third spun toward the movement, but she emerged from the flour cloud, driving her elbow into his midsection with enough force to knock him back into the frozen foods, knocking the air from his lungs. The last man clamped his arm tighter around Michael, pressing a pistol to his temple and shouting threats. Sophia froze only in appearance, calculating angles, distance, his stance too far forward, weight on the wrong foot, grip sloppy from fear. She stepped forward, speaking in the same calm tone, telling him the boy had done nothing wrong, that no one needed to be hurt. His voice rose, cracking with rage, his eyes darting to the others now groaning on the floor. Sophia's left hand shot out, seizing a small rotating spice rack from the end cap and flinging it toward his head. Glass bottles, shattered, pepper and paprika exploding into the air, making him flinch. Michael wrenched free, diving behind cover. Sophia charged, enclosing the 15 feet in 3 strides, driving her shoulder into his ribs and slamming him against the dairy cooler with enough force to spiderweb the reinforced glass his gun clattered across. The tile out of reach. He swung a wild punch with his free hand, but she caught his wrist twisting until the bone gave way with a sickening crack. His scream filled the store as he dropped to his knees, cradling the ruined arm. Sophia's breathing was steady, her mind already scanning for remaining threats. All four were down and breathing, the customer shaken but alive. Michael crouched behind the chip display, pale and wide-eyed but safe. The market was quiet now, except for the sound of the wind against the front windows and the slow ticking of the overhead clock. The calm would not last long. She knew sirens were already on their way. The first sound from outside was the faint rise of sirens growing closer through the storm wind. Sophia took in the scene one more time before they arrived, for armed men restrained with cable ties from the maintenance kit behind the counter, their weapons set neatly on the counter out of reach. Michael wrapped in a blanket she had pulled from the emergency kit, breathing fast but stable. Martha seated on a stool, her hands shaking slightly as she clutched a cup of water, the other customers steadying themselves as if coming back from a long fall. Sheriff John Turner was the first through the door, service pistol raised, followed by Deputies Sullivan and Martinez. They froze for half a breath, taking in the sight of four subdued suspects in a store that looked more like the aftermath of a military skirmish than a robbery. Turner holstered his weapon, his eyes moving from the scattered debris to Sophia's calm stance. He asked what happened, and Sophia replied with the same measured tone she might use to explain a shelf reorganization. She described the time they entered, the number of weapons, their positions, the moment she determined compliance would risk civilian lives. She spoke of neutralizing the threats without unnecessary harm, noting the suspects' poor discipline and signs of possible substance use. The words were precise, without embellishment, like a briefing she had given 100 times before in another life. Deputy Martinez crouched beside the unconscious leader, examining the deep bruise on his neck. Sullivan photographed the shattered spice rack, the bag of flour still spilling across the floor, the dented cooler door. Turner listened, but the crease in his brow deepened. He had known Sophia for 8 years, yet the way she described the fight was not the way a grocery store owner spoke. Her vocabulary tactical, her assessment clinical, her movements earlier more controlled than most trained officers could manage under stress. Michael spoke up from his place near the chip display, telling the sheriff how Sophia had moved faster than he could follow, how she had disarmed and dropped the men before they could react. Martha added that Sophia had saved their lives. The sheriff nodded, but his mind was turning over old details, the remodel that had given her perfect sight lines to both entrances, the strength of the counter's construction, the fact she had bought the store with cash. It painted a picture he had never connected until now. He asked her to come to the station for a full statement once the scene was processed. Sophia agreed without hesitation, even offering for Michael to give his own account if he felt ready. The boy nodded, still watching her with a rather than fear. The paramedics arrived, checking the suspects for injuries and treating minor scrapes on the customers. The storm outside was thickening now, snow clinging to the glass and muting the sound of the town beyond. Turner moved closer to Sophia, lowering his voice so others could not hear. He asked her off the record who she really was. She met his gaze and told him she was exactly what she had always claimed, to be a woman running a store and caring for her community. Turner reminded her that people running grocery stores did not take down 4 armed men in under 2 minutes, did not use words like neutralize and tactical decision, as if reading from a military manual. Her eyes gave away nothing, yet he could sense a wall there as solid as steel. Before the conversation could go further, headlights cut through the snowy haze and unmarked vehicles rolled to a stop outside. Turner's gut tightened at the sight of government plates. Men in dark suits stepped out, moving with the coordination of professionals who did not waste time. In the lead was a tall, lean man whose expression carried a quiet confidence that suggested he was used to having control. He introduced himself as Robert Hayes of the Federal Bureau and said he needed to speak with Sophia about the incident. Turner positioned himself between Hayes and Sophia, reminding the agent that the scene was under his jurisdiction and she had already agreed to give a statement at the station. Hayes replied smoothly that the matter had entered federal authority and they would be taking it from here. Sophia stepped forward, saying she would cooperate, but wanted to ensure her customers and employee were cared for first. Hayes studied her like a scientist, examining a rare specimen, remarking on how remarkable it was for a civilian to neutralize 4 armed suspects with improvised weapons and close combat. Sophia called it luck, though her posture had shifted slightly, weight on the balls of her feet ready for anything. Hayes countered that the men were far from amateurs, listing their backgrounds: former Special Forces, foreign criminal ties, and extensive records. He mentioned something called the Kandahar incident, and though Sophia's face stayed calm, Turner saw the flicker in her eyes. Hayes pressed on, describing a classified operation years ago involving 4 Delta Force operators with the call signs Bishop, Knight, Rook, and Viper, 12 enemy combatants neutralized in under 3 minutes. Turner felt the air grow colder in the room. Hayes hinted that her skills matched those of Viper exactly. Sophia denied ever being in Afghanistan or connected to the military, but Hayes brought up satellite images of modifications to her basement storage area: reinforced walls, advanced ventilation, communications requiring federal licenses. The conversation shifted from pointed questions to something that felt like an interrogation, standing right there in the store. Turner reminded Sophia she did not have to go anywhere with them without charges or counsel. She told him some conversations could not be avoided forever and agreed to go with the agents before leaving. She told Michael to keep an eye on the store and to remember her encouragement about college. Outside, the snow was falling heavier as she stepped into the waiting federal vehicle, knowing the quiet life she had built was ending and that whatever came next would be far from simple. The federal detention facility outside Denver did not look like a prison from the road. Its clean lines and pale concrete, framed by neat landscaping, gave it the appearance of a secure government office. But the layered fencing, the coils of razor wire, and the cameras set high in every corner made it clear what it truly was. Sophia Carter sat in a narrow interview room, hands resting lightly on the metal table bolted to the floor, facing a wall-length mirror that she knew was two-way glass. The overhead lights were harsh, without mercy, washing the room in a sterile brightness that seemed designed to tire the eyes. She had been there for 6 hours without being charged, without being told the limits of the conversation. Agents had rotated through, trying different approaches: friendly chatter, pressure, through silence, veiled threats. Each one meeting the same calm, measured response. The room was a familiar design, one meant to wear down patients' temperature a fraction too cool. No windows, no sense of time. Sophia had endured far worse in places where the stakes were counted in seconds and the wrong answer could end more than a career. Compared to those places, this was almost quiet. When Robert Hayes finally entered the room, he carried a thick folder in one hand and a coffee in the other. He set the folder down with deliberate care, as if its weight meant more than paper could carry. He began by asking if she recognized the photographs inside. They showed 4 figures in desert camouflage, their faces partly obscured by goggles and dust, yet to Sophia they were as familiar as her own reflection from another lifetime. Marcus Webb, who had gone by Bishop David Rodriguez, known as Knight, Sarah Chun called Rook, and the one they had all called Viper. In the official records, Viper had died years ago in a classified operation in Afghanistan. In reality, she was sitting in this federal room, wearing jeans and a simple sweater, with her hair tied back in a way that would never appear in military archives. Sophia looked at the photographs without a flicker of recognition and told Hayes she had never seen them. He slid another image across the table, this one clearer, showing her own face, younger, leaner, framed by tactical gear. Hayes spoke of fingerprint matches, dental confirmation, biometric analysis. He listed the missions credited to Viper: 37 successful operations, including one in Kandahar, where 4 operators had eliminated 12 entrenched enemies in under 3 minutes. He leaned back, watching for her reaction, as he suggested her quiet life in Pine Hollow had been a false identity from the start. Sophia replied that such records were classified, and that if he had them, it meant someone very high up had authorized this investigation. She asked why Hayes told her that 3 members of that unit were now dead under suspicious circumstances, and the 4th, her, was living under a new name with a hidden cache of military-grade weapons. She countered that perhaps someone wanted the last living member of the unit gone and was using federal resources to find and remove her. The conversation turned like a knife. She suggested the possibility of conspiracy. He asked if she was accusing federal agents of murder. She said she was stating facts: 3 dead, 1 remaining under interrogation. And it was clear to her that someone wanted Delta Unit 17 erased from history. Hayes admitted the unit had been disbanded in 2017, but she pressed that its closure had nothing to do with protocol and everything to do with burying missions that were not what they seemed. Hayes walked to the mirror, letting the silence stretch before asking why she thought cooperating with him was safer than disappearing again. Sophia smiled, faintly saying she had spent 8 years preparing for this very moment, and that she had information certain people would kill. To keep hidden, she told him this information was in the hands of someone who would release it if anything happened to her. When Hayes asked what kind of information, she spoke of the truth about why the unit was really disbanded, which missions were real, and which had been covers for corporate espionage, and the names of those who had profited by selling classified intelligence to foreign buyers. The air in the room seemed to tighten as she spoke, and Hayes realized he was no longer conducting an interrogation, but sitting in a briefing with someone who had prepared her battlefield well. He asked if she had proof. She said a Delta operator never entered a mission without multiple exit strategies and insurance. The question now was whether he was here to help reveal the truth or to help bury it outside. The snow continued to fall unseen by those in the windowless rooms, but Sophia felt the weight of it pressing on a moment. This was no longer about her freedom, but about a war that had never truly ended. In that same hour, far from the room, a black SUV idled under the cover of trees outside the facility. Behind the wheel sat Michael Rodriguez, a former master sergeant, who had once been part of the same shadow network as Sophia. He had been watching since the news broke of small-town Shopkeeper taking down 4 armed robbers. He had recognized her style instantly. He had waited for the signal they had agreed upon years ago, for the day the past finally caught up. In the narrow interview room, Hayes leaned forward, his voice lower now. He asked again if she truly believed the people behind this would eliminate her. She answered without hesitation that she knew they would. He studied her expression, weighing truth and risk. Then the intercom in the corner crackled with a sharp announcement: security breach, perimeter compromised, lockdown protocols in effect. Sophia did not move except for the faintest curve of her mouth. She told Hayes they had about 3 minutes before the backup systems went down. As if on cue, the lights flickered and the room plunged into darkness before the red glow of emergency lighting kicked, and Hayes reached instinctively for his weapon. But in that moment between light and shadow, she moved faster than his eyes could follow. When the emergency lights returned, she was standing not across from him, but beside the door, his own weapon in her hand, the magazine ejected and placed neatly on the table. In the doorway stood Rodriguez, in full tactical gear, his night vision rig pushed up on his head. He told Hayes this was an extraction years in the making, and that Viper had been ready for this day. Since she disappeared, Hayes understood then that the rules in this room had changed entirely. Hayes looked from Sophia to Rodriguez, the red emergency light turning the room into a shadowed battlefield. His training told him to resist, but the weight of the moment told him resistance was pointless. Rodriguez moved with the controlled ease of someone who had breached more secure locations than this one. She tossed him a small secure phone and told him that if he wanted to stay alive and keep his conscience, he should use it when the time came. Sophia spoke evenly, saying that 3 members of her former unit had died because they trusted the system to protect them, and she would not make that mistake. She offered him a choice: to stay behind and keep playing the role of loyal agent, or to help uncover the truth and expose those who have been eliminating Unit 17 from within. Hayes knew what was at stake and understood that staying out of this was no guarantee of survival. People who ran operations like the one she described did not leave loose ends. They moved quickly through the corridors, Rodriguez in the lead, Sophia close behind, and Hayes covering the rear. The facility was in controlled chaos, the lockdown protocol slowing movement between sections, the backup lighting turning every corner into an uncertain space. They bypassed 2 security patrols without engagement, slipping into the service wing and out a maintenance exit where the cold mountain air hit like a wave. Outside in the snow-covered lot, Rodriguez's truck was idling, engine warm, emergency gear already loaded. Hayes climbed into the back, while Sophia took the passenger seat. Rodriguez drove without headlights until they were miles from the facility, weaving through back roads. She knew from years of reconnaissance the snowfall thickened behind them, erasing their tracks from the blacktop and hiding their departure. They drove for hours until the road narrowed into a mountain pass and ended at a nondescript ranch property tucked into the trees. The house was unremarkable from the outside, but beneath it was a fully equipped operations center hidden from satellite scans by layered camouflage netting and natural cover. Inside the basement, The glow of monitors filled the space with shifting light, each screen showing pieces of evidence collected over 8 years of shadow work. Rodriguez went to the communications desk checking secure channels while Sophia spread a series of files across a table. Hayes stood behind her scanning the documents, financial records, offshore transfers, corporate ledgers that lined up perfectly with the dates and locations of certain missions. Some missions were legitimate military objectives, but others marked in blue had been assignments to eliminate whistleblowers or foreign assets, whose only crime was uncovering corruption involving powerful companies and the officials protecting them. On the wall, a map was pinned with color markers: red for legitimate targets, blue for corrupted assignments, and yellow for the suspicious deaths of Unit 17 members. The pattern was unmistakable, and Hayes felt the weight of it settle on him. This was not the work of many scattered conspirators, but of one person with reach across multiple agencies and enough authority to order operations without oversight. Sophia brought up a photograph on the largest monitor. The face of a decorated full colonel stared back, his uniform heavy with ribbons, his name well known in military circles as a model of service. She said his name was Colonel James Sullivan, their former commanding officer, the man who had chosen their missions and shaped their assignments. She told Hayes that the evidence showed he had sold classified assets to foreign buyers and used Unit 17 to eliminate anyone who could connect him to those deals. Rodriguez played an audio recording of his voice discussing the need to permanently resolve the Unit 17 problem, complaining that earlier eliminations had drawn too much attention and calling for more subtle approaches. Hayes sat heavily in a chair, realizing his own investigation had been compromised from the start. Sullivan had allies inside law enforcement who diverted attention and buried any sign of these operations in layers of false reports. Sophia pulled a thick folder from a secure drawer, telling Hayes that what was inside would end Sullivan's career and ignite hearings that would shake the highest levels of command. The photographs showed meetings with foreign intelligence operatives, documents of payment schedules that matched the timing of suspicious missions, and communications linking corporate executives to Sullivan's network. It was not just treason, it was profit wrapped in the language of national security. Hayes admitted quietly that if this came to light, it would take down more than one man. Sophia replied that she knew, but protecting the truth meant more than protecting reputations. She had not spent 8 years hiding just to save herself. This was about justice for those who had already been silenced and for the future of those who would otherwise follow them. They spent the rest of the night coordinating next steps. Rodriguez reached out to trusted contacts through encrypted channels, setting up dead drops and contingency plans. Sophia laid out the timeline for gathering the last pieces of proof, while Hayes drafted a strategy for releasing it without giving their enemies time to react. Each of them understood that once they moved the information, the other side would come at them with every resource available. Outside, the storm had slowed, leaving a deep quiet over the mountain. Hayes stepped out for a moment, breathing the cold air and looking back at the house that now served as a command post. He knew that crossing the line into their war meant there was no going back. When he re-entered the operations center, Sophia was standing at the map, tracing the routes they would take in the days ahead. Her posture was steady, her eyes clear. She told Hayes that the war ahead would not be fought in the open, but in shadows where skill, patience, and trust mattered more than firepower. She reminded him that once the first move was made, there could be no hesitation and no retreat. Rodriguez nodded in agreement, saying they had waited long enough and that the moment to strike was coming fast. As the night wore on, they finalized the first phase of their plan. It would start with one carefully chosen leak to the right journalist, followed by a timed release of the rest to multiple outlets, ensuring it could not be buried. Hayes would handle the official channels just enough to keep their pursuers looking in the wrong direction, while Sophia and Rodriguez moved the evidence into secure hands. When dawn touched the peaks outside the safe house, they were still working. The glow of the monitors casting long shadows across the room. Sophia looked at the map one final time before turning to the others, saying that once they left this place, they would be stepping back into the life she had tried to leave behind. This time, she would not be hiding, she would be hunting. Far below in the valley, the roads were still covered in snow, hiding the paths they had taken to reach this place. In the cold silence of the mountains, the three of them knew that what they carried could bring down a powerful enemy or bury them alongside those who had already fallen. Sophia Carter, once known as Viper, was ready for either outcome, and for the first time in 8 years, she felt exactly where she was meant to be.